Hey guys, in today's video we're going to go over removing one of these New Venture 246 type transfer cases. This is right here, you can see the 246 type code. What we ended up having to do, we're pulling the transmission for a different problem, and while we're back here we found an issue with this guy, so we ended up pulling him as well. And this is a 2500 grade truck, 4L80E type transmission, so thought it might be worthwhile taking you guys along for the ride. So if you're interested in seeing how one of these things come off, stay tuned. Alright guys, so we were in the process of pulling the 4L80E transmission on this Suburban, and we noticed that we have this situation with the transfer case here. So you can see we've got all of this staining on the top, nothing on the sides, and if you get on the bottom, I'll show you a little bit on the bottom here. We can zoom in. We don't really have anything on the bottom. Our slip yoke here is nice and dry. There's nothing on there, so we don't have any fluid leaking there. We've got no staining up on top, so it doesn't really feel like this seal is leaking or the slip yoke is leaking. It looks pattern-wise more like something is leaking on the very top of the transfer case and running down because this case tail is kind of slanted a little bit. It's running down with gravity and then just dripping down here. So we're going to have to pull this anyway to change the transmission. It looks like we're just going to end up pulling this and trying to debug its problem as well. The first thing we're going to do to get this out is we're going to remove the drive shaft over here. So we're going to go back to the rear end and remove the 4 bolts that are holding that so that we can pull this off on the back, and then we'll go switch our attention very similarly and pull the shaft off the front. All right guys, we've put some PB Blaster on these 11mm nuts that are securing this in the back. And then we're just going to give ourselves a paint mark. We're interested in just keeping track of the orientation of this guy. We're going to do that on the other side with a different color as well. And then we're going to take these 11s and we're going to struggle to get them off, I guess. There we go. You can't get a socket in here because it's obstructed by the drive shaft. So a box end wrench is really the only option. Get the torque broke. You might be able to switch to something else like this. Speed it up a little bit. And so we're just going to repeat this process for all 4 of these bolts. And then when we got all 4 of them off, we'll be able to remove these straps that are holding in the universal joint, and we'll be able to get this guy off. Now before we get too far, something I probably should have showed you, while you're back here, you want to give this guy a firm wiggle and a shake. Because what you want to make sure of is while you're doing all this other stuff, just in case you've got a problem with the universal joint, now would be a good time to take note of it, and you can pick up that part as well. But in our case, we've got no play. It's nice and stiff the way we would want it, even though it's got some years on it, so we don't have to worry about changing that out. All right, so we're just going to keep pulling these bolts out, and we'll come back when we got the last one. All right, guys, just working off the last 2 on this side. We got our ratchet stuck here for a second. Let me put this back in, just a little hair. Get our tool out, there we go. This guy is just not wanting to come out. So we can get this one. It's the first time these have been off since the vehicle was originally assembled, so quite a bit of torque required to get them to let go. So a cheater pipe can help. little whack with a brass hammer on the box end wrench, you know, whatever suits you to break that rust at the edge so that she'll be able to turn. All right, so that guy's off. You notice we used blue on this side versus yellow on the other side. Not sure why this bolt is wedged in where we can't get it loose and cleared. Might just leave them in there. Really doesn't matter. All right, then we're going to take a crowbar. We'll see if we can get it with this one. Might have to have a larger one to overcome the rust that we've got going on here with these caps. Yep, let me see if I have a larger crowbar. She's wedged in there pretty good. All right, guys, I'm going to have to get like a hammer and see if we can, and we got to have to break the rust on these caps on this U-joint away from the yoke here in order to get this pushed back so that we can lower it. All right, guys, this U-joint cap is pretty rusted into the yoke here, so we had to back the truck up a little bit to change the orientation, and we're trying just to get this rust separated. You know, some liberal PB blaster, some hits with a brass hammer, and then what we're going to try and do now is see if we can wedge this screwdriver in here very gently because we don't want to mar this inside surface, but see if we can get this broke free. All right, so this guy looks like we've got him freed up. Now what we'll do is we'll push the truck and rotate it so we can get this kind of view of the other one. That should finally free this thing. Just because of how extensively rusted this is, this will be another part that we have to put on the replace list. You know, you could probably just pick up the caps, but we'll just go ahead and change the U-joint because it is, after all, 23 years old. So let me rotate this around and I'll show you popping it out. We'll finally be able to get this guy off. All right, guys, now that we've got this turned onto the blue side, we finally have the yoke in a position where we can clear this bolt and get it off. Now we can work on getting this guy separated. All right, so we finally are getting this guy where he's coming loose. All this corrosion. Not quite, though. Still held on a little bit. Still kind of wedged in here and here. So let's see if we can use our screwdriver trick again. If I can find what we did with it. There we go. All right, now we get both these rusty caps loose. In fact, that one just fell off. That one just fell off. I don't really care though because they're rusty and they're going to have to be replaced anyway. Now that we got this off, we're going to end up doing is we're just going to flip the camera angle. I'll show you. We're just going to pull this towards the rear of the vehicle. That's going to slide the slip yoke out of the extension shaft on the transfer case. All right, guys, I'm just going to kind of contort myself a little bit here to help brace this thing. And that's it. Let's go do the front one. All right, guys, after you get the drive shaft pulled, unless you're going to be getting all your transmission work done in one day, you're going to need to make sure that this guy doesn't get some surface flash rust on him. And a product I like using for that is this stuff called Pre-Lube 6. It's just a preservative type of lubricant. It's a good treatment for just spraying on something like this and giving it a wipe down. And it'll just give it a very thin surface coat that'll prevent any flash rust. Because this particular type of metal here, this will start rusting overnight, literally, just from your touching it with your hands. And then we can safely store it until we're ready to put it back on. All right, guys, we're going to take the front off the same way. Now, at this point, make sure you've got the wheels chocked, because that's the only thing keeping the vehicle from moving other than the parking brake. So similar to last time, we're going to come in here and we're going to just mark one color on one side. Now this front one should turn around all on its own. And we've already had some PB Blaster on here working its magic. Same deal, 11 millimeter. Go ahead and let the paint dry on that one. We're going to have to get a pry bar in here to keep it from turning. Find the right wedge point. These are on tight too. Get a little bit more leverage if we're on a lift, but we're not. There we go. All right, same as last time. Actually, this guy spin off with our finger. Now, these ones on the front should go a little easier than the back because they're always getting hit with oil when you do an oil change. So it cuts down on the corrosion. So just spinning them out. We're just going to go around and do the same thing on all four of these. And then when we get to the last one, we'll show popping it out. All right, guys, broke the torque on these last two. Just working them off here. Going to block your view for just a moment. Working this guy off is all we're doing. All right, there's that one. This one looks like he needs a little bit more persuasion. All right, now let's find out if we're okay with these caps or we're going to have the same fight we had in the back. Nope, good. That's how it's supposed to work. Just slides out. Don't have to replace this U-joint. Just want to make sure I can get this all the way off here. Just a little bit more holding on this side. There we go. Okay. All right, so now we're going to go back and do the slip joint side. It's a little bit different than the rear. and then we'll be able to let this guy rest on the crossover pipe. And then, all right, guys, when we look at the back here, there's like a rubber boot on here, and it's held on by a crimp clamp. So we're going to have to get this clamp off first. I'm going to rotate that into position. Now this type here, we should be able just to get a screwdriver or something under here and get it off this little tab that it's held on to. We're not going to try to save this. We're just going to replace it, but right now all we care about is saving the boot. I'll find a weak spot somewhere. Let's see if I can get a longer tool in here. We might have to just pop the skid plate off first to give us some more leverage. We'll see how this works. There we go. All right, so now we can get these little clips off. Now the band clamp is off. This guy, we're going to just get a replacement for. Just going to move him out of the way so we can pull him off. All right, so now what we want to do, we want to save the boot. We want to pull the boot back. Just kind of fold it out of the way. Okay. Still not letting go yet. All right, guys, just a quick shot of what I did that you couldn't see before. So all I did was I pulled our shaft out of the yoke and positioned it right on top there. That's really the only space you're going to have to move it forward towards the bumper, which you're going to need to do once we get this boot to let go. All right, guys, so I'm going to try to pull this boot from the other side. So I think it's actually, the adhesion I think is busted up on it, or released, but we're just not getting the right position to pull it. So I'm going to block your view for just a moment, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to be grabbing on this and pulling it towards the front of the vehicle. All right. So now we've got this guy off. Now we've just got to get some more clearance in the front. All right, guys, just to show you real briefly what we're dealing with here. So we can't go any further towards the passenger side because we've got the transmission in the way, right? So we're hitting this bracket for the shift cable. So we can't go any further that way. We can't come down because we've got the exhaust crossover pipe here. And again, this is a 4L80E and a four-wheel drive setup, right? So you may not have this problem if you don't have this same set of options. And then in the front here, we can get it out of the yoke. We can't get it past the yoke, right? So on the bottom, we're going to hit the housing of the four-wheel drive front end transaxle here. And then if we try to put it up on the top, we're going to hit the oil filter adapter. On this particular vehicle is a 6.5 liter diesel. So that is sitting right in our way on that end. So we are just obscured every which way from Sunday. So we're just going to leave it the way we've got it. And we're going to pull the transfer case off the back. And again, that's just because I'm trying to show you a video just about the transfer case. We're actually going to pull this transmission for another reason, but for this video, we're just trying to cover the transfer case. So if you got this set up, my advice is do the same thing I just did here. We're going to get something to retain these caps so we don't end up having them fall off and lose the needle bearings, because this particular U-joint is fine, unlike the rusty one in the back. So let's move on. All right, guys, we're going to take this skid plate that protects the transfer case off next. These can be two different kinds of fasteners. These late model ones are a T50 Torx bolt. Earlier ones are going to most likely be a 15 millimeter, but this is going to be a T50. Just going to pop a breaker bar on here so we can get them started. And then we'll ratchet them off the rest of the way. When we get this off to the last one. All right, guys, we spoke too soon. Turns out there's an 18 millimeter nut on the back of these things. So, at least in the case of the ones that have a T50 Torx, you're also going to need an 18 millimeter socket or ratchet like I'm using here, gear wrench, in order to get these guys off. All right, so now we'll continue taking them off, and we'll come back when we get them all done. All right, folks, last one. All right, set this guy down. Nut. All right, next step. All right, we got the skid plate out of the way. We're going to come back and get a rear view, and we're going to start doing the connectors. All right, guys, let's get these two sensor connectors at the back of the transfer case out. So we got one on the driver's side, and we got one on the passenger side. Our passenger side one is really gooked up. Same kind of connector. All right, so we got that off. Pull this out of the way. And now we're going to head over to the other side and disconnect the harness from the encoder motor. All right, guys, we're up by the front shaft of the transfer case. We've got a connector here that we need to pull off. To get that guy off, we're just going to lift up on the tab here and wiggle him off. Right, so there's that one, little square guy with 6 pins for the encoder motor. Let's see, we got a little harness clamp up here that we're going to put a flathead screwdriver in. Open that guy up so that we can get this harness off. And then we've got another connector right down here. Pop a screwdriver on here because I can't really get a good grip of it. Super contorted so that you guys can see. And we got that sensor connector off. And the last one we've got is right up on top here. It's got a safety connector on it that we have to get out, this purple piece, and then we'll be able to depress that lever down. So I'm going to try to get this with one hand. Might have to block your view for a moment. Might not be able to one hand this particular one. Not sure yet. Yeah, no, guys, I'm going to have to get this purple retainer out first before I can one-hand disconnect it. All right, we're going to get a small screwdriver under here. Free that up. So now we've got this guy off, and we should just be able to depress on this button. this side. All right, you can press on the top and then finally get this guy disconnected. All right, that's the last of the electrical connections. All right, guys, the next thing we have to get disconnected is this vent hose. So you can see it in this mirror view here. It's held on by a small spring clamp, which is conveniently facing the transfer case, so it's not easy to grab. So we're going to actually have to come in underneath it. Not going to be able to film getting that off, but if have the camera guy hold the mirror for a second, at least be able to show you the technique here. So I'm going to come in with some angled long nose type pliers. And you'll end up coming underneath this guy like that. And you'll end up doing that to get it off. So I'm going to need both hands up here. You won't be able to see anything. So we're going to get that clamp pulled off, and then we're going to extract that hose. Bear in mind that that elbow there is like a white nylon kind of plastic. It's going to be super fragile, so take your time. All right, guys, this is just another view past the flashlight. You can see that small little spring clamp holding on this vent pipe. That's the guy you got to get off in order to pull the pipe off. All right, guys, well, we got the clamp off, and as we pulled the clamp back, this little guy decided to just snap off the top of the case. Now, he didn't break. We can see all the 4 tabs are still there, and they're not broken. So I guess he just popped off. So we'll pop him back in after we pull it out and get the transmission case, or excuse me, the transfer case dropped. All right, guys, the next step we're going to do before we take off the nuts and pull it is we've got a drain plug and we've got a fill plug. They're both 18 millimeter. And just because of the nature of the problem we've got on this, we're going to take the fill plug off first, because I'm curious if this is an overflow problem that we're seeing with this transfer case. You know, just on the off chance that what we've got is stuff coming in from the transmission through a bad seal. All right, so nothing there. So we got a lot of little crud sticking to the back of this. That's interesting. Just wipe that off so we can see what that is later. Actually, we can't even wipe it off. It's like something hard and dried on there. All right, we're going to replace the fill plug. You don't need to torque it down or anything. We're going to do the lower plug. This is where we find out if this is a small problem or a big problem. Because if we don't get anything draining out of here, we've got a big problem. All right, good. We do not have a big problem. So the pump didn't run dry. So we're probably going to be able to repair this. So let's let this guy drain out. We'll put the drain plug back in when it's done, and then we'll pull the 15 millimeter bolts that are holding it to the transmission. All right, guys, it's time to get these 15 millimeter nuts off. There's one here. I don't know how good you can see it on the camera, but there's one here. I've already loosened this one. There's one here. And then there's one up at the very top on the passenger side. There's two more on the driver's side where we disconnected those cables that we'll show you in a minute. The sixth one is obscured, and you have to pull the lower transmission mount in order to access it. So if we take a look here, this is the lower transmission mount here. We've got a 15 millimeter bolt, one on each side, securing this mount to this adapter. This is the adapter that adapts the transfer case to the tail shaft of the transmission. And then we've got two 15 millimeter nuts that hold this onto this cross member. So what we're going to have to do to get the sixth nut out is we're going to have to pull these two nuts, pull those two bolts. If pan back here, you can see we've already got a transmission jack on the transmission. We're going to have to lift the transmission slightly, remove the mount so that we can get a tool in here to remove the 6th nut, and then we can put this back and lower it down and continue with the rest of the process. Now, the tools that I'm using to get these nuts off, I'll hold them up here where you can see them. One basic tool is just a 15 millimeter box end wrench like this, and that's useful for breaking the torque. Most of the rest of these you're going to be able to get off with a 15 millimeter gear wrench like this. You'll just be able to work them off like that, right? So, yeah. Deal like that, right? The very top one, using one of these Craftsman stubby 15 millimeter gear wrenches, right? That you just don't have enough clearance, but this guy you need for the very top one. You can use them for all of them, but I found that the normal size one is fine for the others. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to proceed to remove this 15 millimeter bolt on both sides and these two 15 millimeter nuts so that we can get this transmission mount out of the way. And then we'll show you pulling the bottom nut off the bottom here, the 6th one. All right, guys, what we've done is we've got this jacked up about a little bit more than a ½ inch of space, and that now allows us to move this mount around as we need in order to get a tool in here. Whoops. So that we can get this 15 millimeter nut off the bottom. Already broke the torque here, so we're just going to work this off. And once we get this nut off here, we'll lower the transmission back down and we'll reattach the mount temporarily. And then we'll proceed to remove the other 5 nuts, and then we'll pull the case off. Now, as you can see, as we've loosened all these nuts already, we're starting to get some fluid that runs through the seam between the transfer case and the adapter on the back of the transmission. That's normal. Shouldn't be a whole lot, but there's always going to be a little bit that leaks out of the transmission and gets back in here. There'll be a lot more if there's a problem with the seals. So I'm not necessarily going to bore you guys with getting this whole thing off. I'll go ahead and pull this, and then I'll show you the 2 nuts on the driver's side. All right, guys, here's the last 2 they're showing you. Here's number 5 on the driver's side, right here now down near the bottom where the transmission mount bolt is that we just took out. And here's number 6, right up here in the upper corner, already loosened up. So we're just going to finish removing these nuts, get all 6 of them off, and then we'll get a jack underneath the transfer case, back it off these studs, and drop it down. All right, guys, we've just cracked the seam where the gasket is, just to give you an idea of the kind of ATF that you'll see dripping. So this is definitely ATF versus transfer case fluid, just because of the, the color is really all you can tell the difference of, and the smell. The transfer case fluid is a lot older. It has a very, very, very pungent smell. So we're going to let this drip off, and then we're going to continue backing it off the stud. All right, guys, we're ready to pull this off now. We've got our jack in place. We've got about this much play where we can move it towards the rear of the vehicle so we can get the studs off of the mounting adapter. And if we take a look in here, we can see we've already got a gap here so that we could let that excess ATF fluid that leaks out of the rear tail shaft of the transmission accumulates in here. We want to let that run out. Now what we're going to do is we're just kind of work this off of the studs. Now, main reason we're trying to do this piece is we want to get this pulled forward enough. 2 things: clear those studs from the adapter, but also we've got a helper holding our front shaft, or front drive shaft. If you recall, we didn't have enough clearance to get that out, so that they're holding that in place so that we can also separate that at the same time. Actually, a little bit more slack here, I guess. Now, studs are plenty enough. You can see we just cleared almost the whole thing here. Now what you want to watch for is no damage to any of the electronics, the encoder motor or any of this here. That's the most fragile, expensive item on here. So like we don't want to have this thing hit against this cross member or anything like that. So we'll make sure we got our jack where it's going to take the weight when those studs clear. Okay. All right, so we've got these studs clearing. I think that's it. Yep, we can twist it a little bit. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go on the other side so we can get that shaft off. All right, guys, after you pull it back enough to get the front shaft off, the next thing you're going to do is put the transmission in neutral so that you get a little bit of a twist. And then we're going to lift up and angle it the way you see I have it here, right? So you pull back, twist up, and then angle it so that you can clear the transmission output shaft. Now the rest of the way it's just manhandling it out. What I plan to do is I'm going to pull it back a little bit more. I'm going to slide this piece into this open area here so I can turn it some more, because what we got to do is we've got to get these bolts, these studs rather, they've got to face the passenger side, because the amount of space we have between this cross member and the torsion bar cross member, we're going to need to have the output shaft of the transfer case facing the driver's side and the studs facing the passenger side to have a chance of lowering this down, right? So unfortunately, I'm going to have the camera guy giving me a hand here, so we're not going to be able to film the whole operation, but I'll keep giving you snapshots as we get through. All right, guys, let me slide this front shaft out here and we'll take a look at it. All right, so to clear this guy after we catty-cornered the transfer case, our helper had to slide it up along the frame rail so that we could clear the exhaust crossover and bring it down. Just to take a look at it, right? So we've got this kind of a universal joint on this end. Here's our boot that we were trying to get off. It's splined on this end. Got a little bit of dirt that got in there when we were dragging it across the back of the frame rail. But everything looks in good shape here. And then we flip it around on this end. Before we pulled it, we taped our caps so they didn't come off. We still have our inspection paint marks that we put on there so you know which side is which. And we are ready to reinstall this. We'll clean these caps off before we put it back on, of course, along with cleaning the yoke on both the front and the back. All right, let's keep going. All right, guys, I just want to show you an interim step here. So like we said at the very beginning of the video, what we got here is an NP246 transfer case coming off a 4L80E. And this is on a 99 Suburban. So I'm just going to give you an idea about the clearance problems of being able to try and rotate this the way you would normally do with a 4L60E setup and a half ton. So we can see here our rear output shaft and seal are going to keep hitting this section of the body here. No matter where you try to turn it, you're going to end up having this kind of a clearance problem. And this is mostly because you don't have the room in the front that I'll show you in just a minute, right? So we've got this. Now the amount of space that we're talking about here from the top here down, right, to the top of that cross member is just a tad over 8 inches. That's all you have to work with, between 8 and 8¼ inches tops. And then even underneath here, it only gains you about 3/4 inch more. Now you might have some more on a pickup truck type body, but on the Suburban body, this is all you've got here to work with. And it doesn't matter whether you try to spin it this way or you try to spin it that way, because obviously it's a mirror image. You got the same problem on both sides. So we've got an interference problem here at the top, and we've got an interference problem with the cross member that holds the torsion bars here and over here. I'll give you another view so you can see that as well. So there's just no way to go this way or that way without hitting the edge of either side. Now let's take a look at the other interference points. All right, guys, from the passenger side, we can see we've got an obstruction with this torsion cross member here and here. Now we've got this resting on a jack. You can see the jack is not touching the encoder motor. It's just kind of resting here for safety reasons. It's not even actively being used. We've been manhandling this around trying to verify that there's no way this is going to come out like you would with a 4L60E setup. Now you can see on this side for the rear transmission mount cross member, this flange piece of metal here is going to be an obstruction with this stud in various ways. You might want to try to move this up, down, forward, or back. You're going to always be encountering hitting this. So that's the other obstruction. And then, of course, there's the fact that the 4L80E transmission itself is, I guess, maybe around 2.5 or so, maybe a little bit more or less longer than a 4L60. You throw that transmission transfer case adapter on the end, and you don't even have anywhere near the room in this direction that you would think you would have. Now, as far as the spacing between these two cross members, if we grab our tape measure again, right, so flange to flange, we've got just under 11 inches. That would be the same for any 2500 truck, just to give you an idea of the spacing you've got. Now let me show you the view on the driver's side, and then I'll tell you how we're going to get out of this predicament. All right, guys, from the driver's side, you can see we've got a lot of interference with this case mounting extrusion here against the, again, the torsion bar cross member. And there's another view from this direction where you can see where the lower part of the case is going to be hitting. Actually, that's the transfer, that's the torsion bar cross member there. What I was talking about over here would be your rear transmission mount cross member. Backwards, sorry about that. So you can see, there's no way to, wiggle this around enough because you don't have enough space at the back of the transmission. That's basically what's killing us, is that the 4L80E is longer than the 4L60. Now you can see here, if you zoom in, I pulled some of the crud off of the identification label here just to show you where you can tell what this is, right? So here's the fill plug, here's the drain plug that we did earlier. Nestled right into this crevice on this model is where you can see the inspection plate riveted on, and you can see up there on that top row there, it's a new venture 246 GM, so that identifies the transfer case as a 246. So how are we going to get out of this predicament? Well, what we're going to do, we're going to lose the transmission jack because we're just going to use a floor jack so we have some lower profile. This guy here weighs around 85 or 86 pounds now that we've drained it. So we don't need anything super heavy to deal with it. What we want to have is be able to come down a lot lower. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come over here and we're going to pull on both sides these 18mm bolts that are holding this rear transmission mount cross member in place. Now these have got some super high torque on them, so you're going to need to have a really long breaker bar or an impact wrench with a good supply of beans to it to get these loosened up. And then inside there's an 18mm nut that you need to throw a box end wrench on once you get the torque initially popped. Then we're going to go back over, we'll show you one more view on the other side. We're going to pull the two 15s that attach the lower transmission mount to the transmission transfer case adapter. And then we're going to put the transmission jack back in here. We're going to raise this guy up just like we did when we pulled the 6th nut out. And then we're going to tap this thing backwards to give us about 1.5 inches of clearance so that we can pull this thing down. Okay. All right, guys, a little bit center. Here's the transmission, heat shield, right? Here's our rear transmission mount. So those 15s I'm talking about, this one here, and then the one on the other side, you can't see it, but it's the same thing. We're going to pull those back out again, just like we did when we tried to get the clearance to remove the lower nut from the transfer case stud. We're going to raise this guy back up with the transmission jack again. We're going to pull off, actually first we're going to pull the 18mm on each side, 2 on each side, 4 total, bolts and nuts. We're going to lift this guy up like I just said with these 2 bolts removed, and that's going to allow us to tap, 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 and move this guy out of the way. All right, guys, so driver's side, this first 2, make sure you hit the nuts, the threads extending from outside the nuts with some penetrating fluid first. 18mm, long breaker bar. Once you get a little bit of a turn out of them, And you can go on the inside with a box end wrench and hold them in position. Whoops. All right. Hit that, let that guy hit up against the metal. Wrong way. Once it gets broke, you can just get it off like this, right? All right, I'm not going to bore you guys with this whole thing. I'll just show you a glimpse here at the end what this special nut looks like, and then we'll continue. All right, guys, at some point, you'll get it to where you can turn it by hand. Just hold the gear wrench in position so you get it all the way out. And then what you're after up here, gear wrench out of the way. We've got a nut. You should also have a washer. The nut's going to look like this. It's a special kind of nut. So make sure you keep track of it. And let's go do the two on the other side. All right, guys, here's where we're at. If you think back before, we were talking about moving this rear mount crossmember back. Here's the original two holes for the 18 millimeters. You can see we've shifted this back. We've come in here with a dead blow hammer, and we've just tippy-tapped this guy caddy corner about 2 inches. That's allowed us to, and also we've raised the transmission with the transmission jack again. And that's given us the clearance we need to finally get this guy dropped down part way. However, we got a different problem still now. One of these connectors that we removed earlier is attached to a bracket right there. And you can't see right here, but there's a 15 millimeter in the back. We're going to reach in the back here. We're going to pop that 15 millimeter off and free up that bracket. Now, we chose to remove the bracket rather than trying to pop the Christmas tree connector off there at the bottom, because even though you could probably just pop that guy off, it's very old and brittle and it might break. So by removing the bracket, we'll keep things more the way they were. But as you bring something down like this, you want to watch for stuff like that. You might find that you missed earlier. If you didn't get the vent pipe earlier, for example, don't forget about trying to check it here. There's not a lot of slack on that, at least not on the Suburban model with the 4L80E. And again, just because we don't have those extra inches that you'd have on the half-ton truck or with the smaller transmission. All right, there he is. All right, guys, we're at the end of the game here. You can see this is how far back I ended up seesawing the cross member for the rear transmission mount back. You can see there's our rear transmission adapter still sitting up there, flashlight blocking your view. And what we ended up doing is once we got that pushed back enough, we were able to drop it down and then twist it and lay it on some wood and slide it out. Now, one of the things I was trying to do with this particular project was we there's the wheel chocks in the back, right? I'm just showing you, we did not jack this vehicle up. Just a little extra challenge here. I wanted to see if I could do this without having to jack the vehicle up, and you can. So let's take a closer look at that transfer case. All right, guys, I've got the transfer case here again. It's disassembled, so it's empty, right? It's just the 2 halves, which weighs about 17 pounds of magnesium, plus the 5 studs or 6 studs in the back, and the 2 15s we've got held together. We're going to go back underneath, and I'm going to give you 2 other views of taking this off now that it's not such a bear to handle that might help you get the perspective on how to get it out. All right, guys, let's do this kind of instant replay. So let's back it off from the transmission adapter. The studs, remember, you're going to normally have the planetary shaft in the way. So you're going to have to catty corner it off by tilting the tail towards the driver's side, like we're doing here. And you're going to keep doing that until you can work those studs down away from the adapter. And you're going to keep twisting. And eventually you'll be able to get it where you can bring it out. Now let me show you the same thing, instant replayed from the driver's side. All right, guys, same thing from the driver's side perspective. Backing it off the adapter plate, twisting it off the shaft, bringing it down, continuing to rotate the forward piece down while you twist it so that you have the tail facing the driver's side and you can slide it out. Now, this way, we didn't have to move the rear transmission mount cross member. It still helps to do that, so I'd still recommend you do that because it gives you a little bit more clearance. But this is how we would have done it if we did it. It is, right? We managed to slide it out by putting in different pieces of wood. Just did it that way so that we didn't have to fool around with getting jack stands underneath here. A 2500 grade truck, you should not need any jack stands, and I just confirmed that by taking you through this. So I want to tilt this up and look at that damage side now. This is just another view of that plate that identifies this as a 246 GM. And we can't quite make it out, but it's going to be new venture or new process, whatever the company's name was at the time, serial numbers and dates and stuff like that. This is what was facing in the back. This is the output shaft, of course. We're also taking a quick look to make sure that we didn't damage any sensors, manhandling this thing out of there, which we did not. And we're just taking note of the encoder motor as we twist this around. So we don't want to put any pressure on that. We took a lot of pains not to do that as we got it out. And we don't want to damage it here in the last few seconds. All right, so all I'm trying to do is get a look at our damage up here. So this is, like I saw in the beginning, right? I thought in the beginning, this is some type of fluid caked up with dirt that has accumulated mostly right here. Now, if this was a pump wear through, I would expect it on the sides. At least in the past experience of what others have told me and what I've seen, I've never seen a pump wear through right on the top. This looks more like what we would get. Somewhere under here is going to be the plastic inspection cover, or rubber inspection cover. Yeah, probably there, maybe. It's just really crudded up. But yeah, that's the inspection cover where you would stick your pliers in to release the snap ring that holds this together internally. Either this had filled up somehow because of transmission fluid and worked its way out, or maybe this seal. But even if this, certainly the seal around the sensor, but if that was the case, how did we get it on the other side, right? So if you look inside the crevices here, it's just caked up in these crevices. So there was quite a large quantity of fluid at some point exiting this. Now, this wasn't empty. This had no problems. There's no noise. This thing operated just fine. We just used it last winter daily in four-wheel drive and auto and had no problems whatsoever with it. All right, guys, let me show you what I've done cleaning this. I decided to go ahead and take a peek at what might be going on here. So I've gone through and cleaned a lot of this crud off. I left some of it on here just so you can see how caked up it is. Right, it is super caked up on here. Now, I should point out this vehicle gets driven off-road a lot, and it gets driven down a dirt road to the residence. So that's kind of an explanation at the level of dirt, but not necessarily where this leak is coming from. So if we get all this crud out of here, unless we happen to see something under this section here, which I doubt, there's no evidence of any cracks or anything in the case, which was what I was initially thinking. And since we don't really have evidence of it being overfilled, it's not anything running in from the seal in the transmission, which is another thing I thought could have this kind of symptom. But what it might have been is coming out of this cover that I was mentioning before. So when I got the dirt off this cover, it was still very wet there. So that's what I was thinking. If I pulled the cover off, we can see inside. It's in here. It's all broken and falling apart. I don't know if that's maybe because of some pressure and fluid trying to come out. I don't know, but that's not good that is like that in there. So that's part of the problem I think we have. Before we go back and look at that again, I want to point out a couple other things while we got this guy out here. When you're cleaning it, be careful with this sticker. This sticker with this two-letter code here is going to help identify the type of configuration of your NP246 case. There are a lot of different flavors, and there's different numbers that are going to, letters that are going to appear here. This one's a Peter Nancy, PN, so when you go to get a rebuilt unit, if that's the route you go, you're going to want to make sure that it's compatible with the PN code, along with the year and the vehicle it came out of. The other thing I want to show you on here is about these bolts, right? So this bolt here that's partially removed is the one we took off that was holding that wiring harness bracket. And what I want to show you on these bolts, in particular, if we take a look at this one over here, just from a distance, we can see this covering that's on it is peeling off due to corrosion, right? See that? And what you've got on here is a kind of a vinyl type coating on the head of the fastener all the way down halfway through the shank and threads of the fastener. And that's very important. You can't just use regular bolts on these magnesium cases, right? These new processed cases are made of magnesium. You can see it right here. If we kind of rub our finger here, there's a recycle symbol for magnesium and letting you know this is a magnesium alloy case. And that makes it really light, but also makes it kind of fragile, but also, more importantly, to the point I was just making, it means it's very susceptible to dissimilar metal corrosion. Now, there's a sticker underneath the sticker here with the code. I'm not necessarily going to get it where you can completely read it, but you'll see like this green sticker. They're not always green, but there's always going to be some kind of warning on here. And when you read this, what you'll see is it tells you to be very careful that these fasteners are replaced with the correct type. Otherwise, that steel is going to just corrode inside that magnesium threading, and you'll never get this thing back off again without destroying it. So that's very important. You have to buy these GM bolts to reattach this. All right, so now let's go over and take a look inside here again. So what we got going on here is some type of dried up material that's probably related to the lubricant. And you remember when we took the fill plug off earlier and we were going to do the drain, we noticed a similar kind of material on the inside of the fill plug. Right? So when we took this off, we noticed that we've got this hard, varnished material on here. So what I'm starting to think, if I take a look inside, I can see it on the inside too. So I'm starting to think here is some kind of problem occurred where the fluid got overheated somehow and created this kind of hard varnish material. It kind of looked in first glance like a piece of plastic because it had perfectly molded itself to the base of this. In fact, when I first pulled this off, I didn't realize that the lettering I was seeing in that was the bottom of this rubber plug, so it made it look like that was some kind of piece of plastic there. But no, there's no plastic on here because you're supposed to be able to get your pliers in here in order to pop this C-clamp out of here so you can pull this thing apart. So this is all indicative of an overheating problem with the material inside the fluid, and it is all hardened like that. So this is definitely a major rebuild operation, and I don't even know if I'm going to entertain doing that because it could be more than just your usual bearings. Might have to be a replacement of the clutch pack. You'll end up replacing most of the stuff in here. And for the amount of time and the money that's involved in doing that, I might just pop in a rebuilt in here. We'll have to see. Whatever I end up doing, we'll show another video on that. But I did want to come back and highlight that. So anyway, I hope these tips help you. Let's kind of wrap it up. At this point, you know, it's going to require further diagnosis. Mostly what this video was about is how to extract this transfer case from a truck that's got the 4L80E 2500 grade type setup. So I'm done at this point with this video. If I end up doing something with this repair and taking it apart, we'll do a different video. So if you got questions about the pull and getting it out, go ahead and leave a comment below. I'll try to help. If you found this video useful and it saved you some time and helped give you some ideas about what you could do on your own, hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. It helps the channel and helps me. And also, don't forget to put your rear transmission mount back in and put your cross member back where it was and take it off the jack stand pressure. You don't want to leave that sitting too long in this situation. And as always, thanks for watching.